So yeah, today I'm going to keep it quite focused on Darktrace's offerings, the products that we have available, and we're going to go into a little demonstration in a real life situation on how Darktrace works in the email environment. Again, if there are any other products that you guys would like to see, I'm always available. I'm in Zoom quite a lot these days, as Andrew alluded to, but also obviously from an online perspective, always available as well. So today, what I'm going to be diving into is the Darktrace Active AI Security Platform. So this is a sort of new positioning that Darktrace has taken based on the way that our products have evolved, as opposed to being just your standard network security or your email security provider. Darktrace has built its platform out to be your sort of one-stop shop for security, cybersecurity. And the whole purpose of this is to put a business in a proactive state, as opposed to a reactive state. I liken IT and security people as firefighters. You're always trying to put out the fires, and very difficult to actually prevent that fire from happening because there's just so much to do on a day-to-day basis. And again, I appreciate everyone's time here today. I know everyone, super busy people. I know Andrew stirred up some panic with the email stats, so I'm sure everyone's logging into their firewalls and their EDRs to check that they're safe. So yeah, I'll try to keep this nice and short today for you. So I think in order to build a picture around Darktrace, I think it's important to understand the market and the different types of products that there are available. What we found, and the reason why Darktrace exists, is because of the siloed nature in which security products have been built. So as security or IT has evolved over the years, we found different problems appearing. And that comes with the proliferation of cloud, moving things into things like Office 365, remote work that happened with COVID. All of these surfaced a number of issues that didn't exist 5-6 years ago. And what we saw with that picture that Andrew showed, thousands of vendors popping up out of nowhere to solve one particular problem within the organization. And what this has created is a lot of point solutions. You have a secure email gateway for your email. You have endpoint detection and response for your devices. You've got cloud security on one hand, but none of these solutions from these different vendors talking to each other to build a context of the organization and building sort of meaningful understanding of that organization. And what this means is that there's a lack of visibility across the different tools. Threading these different attacks across these different tools is difficult and requires a lot of human intervention. What we've also found is that a lot of these tools are looking at known attack data, existing threat intelligence, things that have been reported on, that are pulled into these tools, databases, rules and signatures that require a lot of configuration, and don't often keep up with the way that attacks are scaling out with the use of AI. Andrew again alluded to it. The threat landscape is changing on a day-to-day basis. You've got for-profit malware groups. You've got all of these people making businesses out of attacking businesses. And the sophistication of that is just growing day by day. And so these existing tools often miss novel attacks. They miss insider threats, nation-state attacks, which we're seeing being very prevalent if you look at sort of Ukraine, Russia, what's happening now. There's obviously an on-the-ground war, but there's a cyber war happening in parallel. And this is spread across the entire world. What we've seen, again, is a huge focus on XDR. XDR is big for a reason, right? You've got your CrowdStrikes of the world, massive businesses, 50,000 employees, and they're there for a reason, right? To protect your endpoints. But what we're seeing is that there is a place where that type of approach falls down, and that is on your entire network visibility. Being able to understand each individual user device, being able to thread that into one easy-to-use platform hasn't really existed until Darktrace sort of came about. So what we've seen is that 48% of security practitioners want to improve integrations amongst existing security tools. The integration side of things is really important, and that's where Darktrace really hits home, and we'll speak about that just now. I want to jump into just a quick example, and I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but an attack is never just one prong, right? What we're seeing is these multi-domain attacks happening from many different parts of the business, often sourcing from one place, email being a very popular attack vector. So what we're seeing is an example of a Medusa ransomware that Darktrace was actually able to pick up on at one of our customers. But basically, from the stages of reconnaissance, using generative AI to scan across LinkedIn profiles, scan across social media platforms, understanding each individual user granularly so that they can go in with a AI-generated phishing attack that really hits home, that looks like something genuine. That person was then the patient zero. They logged into what they thought was their Microsoft account, therefore sort of giving away their credentials to an attacker. That person then flows into the network. They start doing minor reconnaissance, living off the land attacks, what we call it, making small connections here and there to make themselves look like a normal person within the network, and then slowly moving across the network, accessing sensitive files, all the way to sort of the encryption of files. We've seen this with ransomware. It's very prevalent in Zim at the moment, and yeah, once you've got those C drives, D drives encrypted, there's not much else you can do besides, unless you've got very good backups. Often we're in a position where we now need to pay a ransom, and again, a ransom is way more expensive than securing your environment with the proper tools. So it's just an example of one that we've caught, and an example of how secure attacks never happen just in one part of the business. They often move around and use different holes within the organization to move through. So one of the big messages that we like to say is that obviously we need to get cybersecurity into a place of proactivity, right? So the three main pillars of proactivity is having real-time and continuous learning from the business. So being able to rapidly understand as things change, getting complete visibility of your network and your whole IT, OT environment to understand how things are moving through, right? How things are moving naturally across the business. You need that complete visibility. You need to understand each individual device, what's connected to the network, what's malicious, what's not. And you need to also strike the balance between human intervention and AI intervention. You can never replace humans, but you can also never take humans into an AI fight. So the balance between Darktrace, the ability to use AI to empower humans to make them more efficient, and more efficient in decision making when it comes to stopping attacks, allows you to optimize your resources, not having to hire 40 people into a security team when there's a skills shortage. And you can have AI on your side to ensure that that small core team that you've got within the organization is as powerful as they can possibly be. So then we ask the question, which approach has the greatest potential? So we've got two different approaches here. We've got an attacker-centric approach, and we've got a business-centric approach. Obviously, from what Andrew mentioned earlier, Darktrace is the business-centric approach, learning what is normal to you, and being able to understand what is anomalous, what is malicious, and stopping that in its tracks. You've got an attacker-centric approach, which is a very common approach, and something that's used again by email gateways, EDRs, etc. It's necessary for certain parts of the business, but it's not as scalable as what we see with the business-centric approach, where there's an unlimited use case across each individual part of your network or part of your IT infrastructure. So this is just basically showing you how Darktrace is differentiated from what you may have seen in the market before. And we'll get into how Darktrace, using integrations with other products that may be your attacker-centric products, allows us to understand the organization at a much deeper, more granular level. So this is where we introduce the Darktrace active AI security platform. So a lot of people know, and Darktrace has been around for some time, and throughout our journey here, a lot of people in this room may have seen demos, they might have done POVs, but the platform has changed significantly over the years. Initially, the messaging might have been Darktrace is a network detection and response tool. True in a way, that is the way that the business scaled. It's our most popular tool used around the world. But subsequently, we have added on a lot of different modules to ensure that the business is covered in all areas. So I want today to focus on the second from the bottom, is on our platform products. So at the very basis of Darktrace, you'll see at the bottom there, we are using self-learning AI, but also multi-layered AI to get an understanding of who you are, using things like your communications, your people, your locations, cloud, devices, equipment, all of that being fed into one central platform to build an understanding of who you are and what is normal. And with that AI, we plug this into all the different parts of the business. We've got Darktrace Email, Darktrace Network, two of our most popular products. We've seen a massive move from physical network infrastructure into cloud infrastructure, and we see this journey happening at quite a rapid pace in Zim. So what Darktrace has done is built a cloud-native product that integrates directly with AWS and Azure, as well as Google Cloud as well. Then from an identity perspective, we think about identity as SaaS, so your SharePoint, your OneDrive, your Teams environments. So building this platform that allows you to get visibility across the entire organization to again build that understanding of who you are. And for us, when we then go and apply what we call an autonomous response, a response action that contains threats in real time without any human intervention, we are doing that with an extensive knowledge of the organization, its people, its devices. And so when we take that action, it's often super targeted and allows for business to continue as normal without disruption. On top of that, we've got our cyber AI analyst. I'm sure there are a few analysts in this room that find themselves super snowed under by the amounts of alerts that they're getting on a day-to-day basis. And that level 1, level 2 triage of alerts sometimes falls away because we're dealing with these huge fires that we need to solve. And that's where the cyber AI analyst comes in. Now we are putting multi-layered AI into the analysis of the alerts that you're getting. So we can actually do the full investigation process for you, show you how that investigation was done, and tell you what actions we've taken to ensure that you are only dealing with the most important things and strategically remediating for the future. Any questions just on the platform before I sort of go any deeper? All good. So one piece that I feel is also not common knowledge within a lot of the regions that we work in is Darktrace's ability to fit seamlessly into your existing environment. We often have meetings where people are like, no, I think we're covered, we've got a firewall, we've got an EDR, and we use the native cloud security platform within AWS. Fantastic. The purpose of Darktrace is really to sit as your last line of defense when it comes to security. And in order to do this, we need to have built integrations, right? So as you can see, Darktrace aims to sit in the middle and integrate into all of the different platforms that you've already got within your stack. So we're not here to come and say, you need to rip and replace every tool out of your stack and replace it all with Darktrace. We understand that there is a need for certain tools, and Darktrace needs to be able to ingest information from those tools. From an EDR perspective, we can push decisions or responses through an EDR as well. So really giving us that ability to sit in the middle, but also ensure that your security stack is stackable, right? So that's, this is a really nice picture of where we fit We've got out-of-the-box API integrations, one click into over 90 different security tools. Again, improving the context of our decision-making is important. So understanding the rules that sit within your firewalls, within your EDRs, is important for us to know as well. And so all of these things can drive the decision-making to make your team more efficient on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I'm going to jump into a quick demonstration. It's going to require some clicks, so please forgive me. Awesome. So Andrew put the context in around email. Email security, 94% of attacks are starting within the mailbox. And I think this is due to many different reasons. I think a lot of it comes down to the sophistication of the attacks, but also, the normal sort of daily security awareness training, which can fall away on the wayside because of how busy organizations are, staff turnover, all of these types of things. Email really is the number one attack vector. So what I thought I'd focus on today is the Darktrace email product. So what you're seeing in front of you now is the dashboard that you guys would work on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to email, this is truly a set and forget tool. From an email perspective, if you're on Office 365, it's a one-click integration. We use a journal rule to understand each individual email, where we effectively are taking a copy of the mail, we're applying our analysis over 750 data points per email, and we also we implement laterally to the mail flow, so there's zero latency when it comes to our decision making. What you're seeing now is the page that you would land on. So at the beginning of every day, you want an analysis of what's happened over the last 24 hours or the last sort of 12 hours. You can jump here and you'll see a very nice, it's very, very small writing, so I doubt you guys can read it, but effectively giving you a summary of exactly what's taken place within the certain period. So you can see the number of internal emails, the number of external emails, the number of attacks that we've picked up on a certain period, the most sort of a common attack vector over that period, the most attacked person, and all of these insights, really just giving you a nice picture of what we can do. But I think the power in Darktrace comes in the way that we deal with malicious emails. So on the left-hand side, you'll see all the different attack vectors that we see. So we see phishing links, credential harvesting, forged addresses, internal IT impersonation. It classifies all of this for you so that you don't have to go do it yourself. We can see all the stats in the top left, number of outbound, number of threats, the percentage of the user base that's attacked. And then obviously you get a nice graph to show you what that looks like. If we go into the Actions tab, so this is super important. When dealing with things like secure email gateways, often the action is just to hold the mail from ever going into the mailbox. They see a slightly suspicious link, they might see an attachment that could possibly be just a normal attachment being shared between colleagues. They see that as malicious and they block it from going into the mailbox. This is something that can cause huge disruption, right? Andrew speaks about PO. This could be, a very important payment that the business needs to make, and if you don't make that payment, you shut off services. If that gets stopped by a gateway, that's the type of thing that can cause business disruption. And so Darktrace takes a very precise and surgical approach to the way that we defang emails, and so we've got many different ways that we can do it. So you'll see on the left hand side at the bottom, you'll be able to see the different actions that we can take. Obviously, the most severe action that we'll take is to hold an email from ever going into the mailbox. What we can also do is move things to junk. If we said, maybe someone's shopping on Takealot or whatever, we can move that Takealot email over to junk or to spam. We can take link actions, so we can lock links, double lock links. We can strip attachments, reformat attachments, all without any human intervention, based on our understanding of each individual user, the way that they communicate through email. So again, we can see in a really nice graph the different trends, what's more prevalent at the time of that day that you look. I think something that's also super important is on the data loss side of things. My limited understanding of the Data Protection Act, I know that there are severe consequences for data leakage in the Zimbabwean environment. You've got important sensitive data that's leaked. We've got POPIA in South Africa, a very similar act, and the punishment for leaking sensitive information can be quite severe. And so the tools that you have in place need to be able to help you in avoiding this. And Darktrace email, the email vector is one that's very common, right? I myself downloaded my IRP5 on my work laptop. I try to send it to my personal address. Immediately that flags an email concern, right? The business needs to look at it, needs to see that that's just a personal document, but this gives you the opportunity to control what leaves the business through email. And this, you'll see, is super important. So we see on the left, the new correspondent file transfer. Maybe we've got Prince now emailing his sales account list over to his personal email address because he wants to take that with him. If he was to leave Axis, again, and Yasha not going to have any of that. So we're going to stop that email from going out and ensure that Prince is held to account for that action. In terms of misdirected email, this happens super often. I know many of you know multiple Johns or multiple Mikes, and you by mistake type the wrong mic in, and you're now sending it to a different business. Some personal, very sensitive information over to the wrong person. Darktrace will pick up on that based on user behavior, based on your previous conversations, previous mail history with that person. We're able to identify that email should not be going to that person based on what we know. Another quick one that I wanted to just chat on is our integration from an identity perspective, SaaS. We're looking here specifically at an Office 365 account. As I mentioned, people can easily fall victim to an attack where highly sophisticated login page comes in for Microsoft. All of a sudden your credentials have been harvested, and now that person sitting in Russia, sitting in Brazil, is now logging into Office 365 accounts. Our integration on the SaaS perspective shows you, cool, we flagged Prince is now sitting in Brazil when, this morning he logged in from Harare. This is impossible travel. There's no ways he could be there. We're going to isolate this account. We can use our integration with Office 365 to log him out of that account to ensure that whoever's using these credentials is forced to change a password or cannot access the Office 365 account in totality. So really important there, and I think, again, a very common product or a common issue that we see in Africa. Lastly, I just want to take you through an example, right? And again, this is super small, so you can't really see, but in terms of how we analyze each individual email, you'll see all the analysis on the right-hand side. So in this particular case, you'll see on the top left over here, you'll see that we give it a 99 out of 100 anomaly score. What this means is that this is as close to abnormal as it can possibly be. In this case, we've got in the title, urgent payment due, claim number XYZ from the Health Corporation. But this is coming from a trusted source. We've got two individuals that have previous mail history, one being a supplier to another business. But what Darktrace has noticed here is that the way that they're communicating, they never used to speak about payment claims. This person's just an account manager for the supplier. They don't generally deal with finance issues. Darktrace has picked this up and given it a number of different model tags. So you'll see here, we've got email account takeover, potential malware, ransomware, there's a phishing link in there, and most importantly, this is out of character. So out of character really hits home on the behavioral analysis of Darktrace, being able to understand each individual user, the way they communicate within the business and outside of the business, and being able to flag this as super anomalous. The fact that we can pick up on potential malware or ransomware behind a link also shows you how in-depth we can go with the analysis, and showing us that it's a potential email account takeover is very in line with that out-of-character behavior. This person's credentials have most likely been harvested, they've gotten access to their Office 365 and their Outlook mailbox, and now they're just taking chances by sending payment claims to all of the people that this business supplies. And maybe 1 out of the 10 times they hit and they succeed. But if they had Darktrace, more than likely they would not have. So a really nice example there in terms of how we apply our analysis to each individual email. Again, over 750 data points per mail that we're analyzing. So I want to stop it there and just see any questions, comments. Anyone want to do a POV?
To our partners, we give them every minute. Thank you so much. My pleasure having you.
Thank you, Anasha. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for being here today. I'll quickly jump to the next slide just so that you know who myself and Ross are. So a very quick introduction from my side. So first and foremost, a massive thank you to Axis Solutions. They are an incredibly important partner for us in the region. I think, Prince, we've probably worked with the team for about 3 or so years now, so it's a relationship that's growing and thriving. Most definitely one of our key strategic partners in the region. If there's anything that you need from us or them post the session, please chat to Prince, chat to the team. We'd be more than happy to help you. But in the interest of time, as Nyasha said, I think we can jump straight into the agenda. So very quickly, in terms of an introduction for those of you that I haven't met, Andrew Nunn, as you can see from the slide, I currently manage the African Darktrace channel. So I have the privilege of working with all our strategic partners across the region. And then Ross, who will be jumping on the microphone in a few minutes, is our Darktrace country manager for Zimbabwe. So he works with both existing clients that we have within the region, as well as working with prospective clients that are interested in what it is that Darktrace is doing within the cybersecurity industry. So very quickly, guys, as you can see from the agenda, what we're going to do is give you guys a bit of a better understanding of what it is that we are seeing in Africa, specifically from a cybersecurity perspective. As I mentioned, I've been with Darktrace for almost about 5 years now, so I've actually had the privilege of working in Zim specifically for about a 5-year period, and it's been incredibly interesting to see the transition, the challenges, and also the increased investments in cybersecurity from organizations being both large and small scale. So what I'm going to do is just take you guys through some of the findings that we've seen in Africa, as well as Zim, specifically in cybersecurity, take you through some of the challenges that we're seeing are becoming an issue for both Zimbabwean organizations. But like I said, Africa is a large, we're seeing that the region is highly targeted. So without further ado, I always like to kick it off with a few statistics, or just to set the landscape in terms of what it is that we're seeing and dealing with in the African landscape from a cyber security perspective. So a very interesting stat, and it's one that I've actually used previously, but the reason I've used it again is, as you can see from a recent Forbes report, it has mentioned that cybersecurity, or the cost of cybercrime, is predicted to hit 8 trillion in 2024, which it did. It actually exceeded $8 trillion in 2024 from a cybercrime cost perspective. So I see you guys, a lot of guys looking up. That's a lot of ZIG, if I'm not mistaken. That's a hell of a lot of ZIG. And we're expecting to see that climb to over $10.5 trillion US by the end of this year, which is quite frightening. And the key reason being is that we're seeing, not just from a Darktrace perspective, but from cybersecurity professionals and leaders that we work with, that cybercrime has become big business for organizations. Organizations that are targeting Zimbabwean banks, education departments, governments, etc. These are well orchestrated individuals and companies that are set out to destroy businesses from a cyber perspective. Another interesting stat that some of you might have seen previously, but for me is quite an eye-opener. A KPMG cybercrime report recently mentioned that in the last 12 months, 1 in 3 African organizations experienced some form of cybercrime within their business, which, like I said, is frightening. You know, the discussions that we're having at the moment with IT professionals is it's not a case of if you're going to be hit by some form of cybercrime, it's when, and you've got to be prepared for that. So what we've also seen in Africa is that these are generally the type of segments or verticals that are being the most targeted. And we see that both in South Africa, Zim, and throughout Africa where we work. So mining is a huge industry at the moment that is being targeted by cyber professional criminals. Main reason being is, of course, the mining industry have incredibly critical infrastructure. If a mine is down for even an hour of the day, you know, they are losing hundreds, if not millions of dollars. Financial institutes, banks, insurance, always globally, but more specifically in South Africa, these are verticals or segments that are being hit. Government, state-owned enterprises, critical infrastructure, so power supply, electricity providers, hospitals. You know, we saw one of the largest hospitals in South Africa was actually hit by a massive ransomware attack on Friday, and we were helping them, you know, pick up the pieces. And then finally, telcos. We're seeing both in Zim and in Africa at large, telcos are one of the hardest hits in terms of segments. Then for me, this was once again a very interesting stat, and my fellow countrymen here in Zimbabwe, you guys are mentioned in the specific stat. So in January of 2025, 8 out of the global top 20 hit countries in the world were found here in Africa. So we can see our friends in Ethiopia, Zim, Angola, Uganda, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and Mozambique. Good to see South Africa wasn't there, Ross. It's one of the first times that we haven't been mentioned in one of these stats. But, you know, like I've mentioned, guys, it's interesting and important to unpack why this is the case. Why is Africa all of a sudden in the crosshairs in terms of cyber criminals? You know, why are they really focusing their efforts in the likes of a Zim, a South Africa? And I think one of the key reasons for that is that we, unfortunately, in Africa are still 1, 2, 3 steps behind in terms of organizations taking cybercrime seriously, critically, and over and above that, obviously investing in software such as Darktrace and others in order to keep themselves, you know, protected and well aware of what's going on. So once again, you know, just pulling up a few interesting articles recently, and these are all alluding to Zimbabwe specifically. So if you jump on Google, you look at any of the recent reports, you'll see that there's tens, if not hundreds of articles specifically mentioning some of the issues that we're facing here in Zim from a cyber crime perspective. I think what's good to see, and we've had a similar discussion at an event that we held with Axis Solutions last year, is there was an incredibly large spike in cybercrime within the region, and specifically from an email perspective. Myself, Ross, and our compatriots, about a year ago, you know, we were getting calls once, if not twice a week from organizations in Zim that were reaching out for assistance to say, you know, we've experienced some form of cyber hits, and to be honest, 80% of those were in the email space, which is quite frightening. And I'll go through that in a bit more detail on one of the further slides. But very interesting to see, you know, headlines like Zimbabwe trains government officials in cybersecurity skills. You know, that for me is a positive article, that's a positive move. And we're seeing it not just in Zimbabwe, but across Africa. The fact that organizations and governments are now starting to take this threat seriously. They're starting to train up, they're starting to spread skills and awareness, and more specifically, like I mentioned, they're starting to invest in products in order to keep themselves safe. So like I mentioned at the outset of our discussion, myself and Ross have the privilege, obviously, of not just working in Zim, but we, as Darktrace, as a business, have presence from the tip of Cape Town all the way up to Cairo. And what's quite nice about that is we can start looking at Africa as a bigger picture. And what is, you know, specifically hurting businesses in South Africa might not be the case in Zim. But what I'll go through in a later stage on this slide is just go through kind of the golden thread, or the most typical type of crime that we're seeing from a cybersecurity perspective in Africa. And like I mentioned previously, I think the key reason why we as Africa are being targeted is that there are still fantastic resources and wealth that exists in Africa, but what we haven't done as cybersecurity professionals at large across the continent is invested and trained and skilled ourselves up. So we're on the back foot. So I like to use this slide quite often because, it's all doom and gloom. It's, you need to invest in cybersecurity products. You need to invest in technology. The CEO will phone the CTO and say, we've got a massive issue. We need to double down on our investments in security. Go forth and conquer. The CISO will jump on and go, okay, shucks, where do I start? These are just some of the technologies that currently exist in the cybersecurity space, which is quite frightening. I see a lot of people in the audience are squinting just to try to see the number of logos on there. But what's quite frightening, if you look at governance, identity, network, endpoint, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of options that exist for the modern, security teams, and it can be overwhelming. But I guess that alludes to the next point. I think one of the main things that we're seeing across every vendor, every technology, every cybersecurity business that exists now is this trending use of AI. And we'll go into that in a bit of detail because, Ross will go through the product after our tea break, but the core foundation of Darktrace as a technology is based on what we call self-learning AI. So back in 2013 when we were founded, the original foundations of the business were based on the fact that we can leverage AI as cybersecurity professionals to stay one step ahead of criminals in the space. So let's go through a few parameters or a few points of discussion around this AI. So I think one of the main things that's important to note, and I've mentioned it previously, is that unfortunately, for all of us in this room, cyber criminals are leveraging AI, and they're leveraging it incredibly well and in a sophisticated manner. So you can see from this, for instance, malware groups are utilizing AI to lower the barrier for novice threat actors. Expanding interconnectivity and AI adoption has increased the attack surface that businesses now have to protect. And it contributes to greater scale and efficiency and impact of attacks. So we see it when we're dealing with ransomware, when we're dealing with breaches, that we are almost fighting AI with AI, which is quite scary. No longer is the human, in my opinion, capable of fighting, AI and machinery. We always say, myself and Ross, that you can't bring a human to a machine fight. Even if they're as big as Prince, they stand absolutely no chance against AI. But the beauty of AI as well is, although cyber criminals, as I mentioned, are utilizing it, what it means for modern businesses is the fact that they can use AI for the adoption of efficiency. And this is not just obviously from a cyber security perspective, but we're seeing businesses even here in Zim, some of the mines that we work with are using modernization from an IoT perspective. They're utilizing AI and technology within their mines to increase efficiency, increase safety, and like I said, obviously increase the fact that they're safe from a cyber perspective. And I'm going to sound fairly intelligent here, but I actually have absolutely no idea what this paradox is about. But there is a paradox called Javon's paradox, and it's quite an interesting one because it alludes to kind of this conundrum that IT professionals are facing now, because your board, exco, CEOs are saying it's almost an obligation that as a business you need to adopt AI. And the teams, like I alluded to on the previous slide, go, well, where do we start? There's all these options, how do we best utilize it? And Javon's paradox alludes to, back in the 1800s, there was an issue because coal was running short. Myself and Ross in South Africa are facing a similar issue, hence why we have so much load shedding. But coal was extremely, there was a huge shortage during the 1800s, and what they did is they went, well, what we're going to do is we're going to increase the efficiency of steam engines and tools that utilize coal. But what then in fact happened is that as an increase in the efficiency of those products, what it meant is that the demand of coal now went up because more people were using steam engines and tools that utilize coal. So it's much the same with AI. It can either be your enemy or your friend, depending on how you use it within your business. So from a recent threat report that Darktrace does once a year, we saw that from all our 11,000 customers that we work with across the globe, 95% of them agree that AI-powered solutions are incredibly beneficial and important to use for both security and for a business at large. but only 26% of them actually understood the different types of AI that you could use. And like I mentioned, previously, unfortunately for us here in Africa, we're a few steps behind, and this is much the same when it comes to AI. Asia, the US, Europe have been using AI for almost 20 years, whereas in Africa we've been using it for about 8 to 10 years. So there's a lot that we need to kind of upskill ourselves on in terms of utilizing it in a more efficient manner. Because what it can do, and specifically in cybersecurity, what AI can provide is complete visibility across your entire digital estate. So IT and security professionals now can leverage AI to give themselves a larger and a single pane view of their entire IT estate. It can help with continuous and real-time learning across your business, and it can strike that right balance between human intelligence and AI-based tools. So myself and Ross, whenever we have events or meetings, outside of security, all of the organizations and partners that we work with always ask us one question, is AI going to take all of our jobs in the next 5 to 10 years? It's a good question. But what we're seeing specifically from a security perspective is, in my opinion, there's absolutely no world that exists where you won't have that balance between human intervention and AI. We're seeing specifically from a security perspective that AI is there to enable cybersecurity professionals. It's there to make your jobs easier. It's there to ensure that businesses are secure. But you will always, fortunately, hopefully, unless there's any AI robots in the room, you will always need the intervention of human touch. And that's much the same with Darktrace. And when Ross takes you through a demonstration, that will become a little bit more clear. So very quickly, and I'm not going to bore you with Darktrace too much, but I think it's important to just, for those in the room that aren't aware of what it is that we do, it's a good segue to introduce Darktrace as a business. And the fact that, like I mentioned, the foundation of our entire business is based on self-learning AI. So we are a British company recently bought by the Americans. We have almost 12,000 customers across the globe now. We work in, I believe, 24 different African countries. A lot of people aren't aware of that. So some of our biggest regions across Africa are Zambia, Kenya, Ghana, Botswana, and the likes of Egypt as well. And we have close to 40 employees that actually sit on the ground here in Africa. So myself and Ross are based out of Johannesburg. We have pre-sales engineers, we have sales teams, we have everything that we need in order to ensure that we run an efficient business here on African soil. We travel into Zim on a regular basis. Like I mentioned, I've been working in the Zimbabwean market for about 5 years. Ross is basically a local. He no longer has to use Google Maps when he comes to Zim, which is fantastic. He frequents a lot of the different restaurants and places. So, it's important to note that we are an African business at the core. But having said that, of course, as I mentioned at the outset of our chat, strategic and focused partners such as Axis Solutions for us are invaluable. Having those local connections, those networks, for us that's incredibly important. So like I mentioned, guys, what is Darktrace? So Ross always laughs at me because I always like to dumb it down in terms of what it is that the product does. I only just passed matric back in 2009, so I like to keep things simple. But at the core of Darktrace and our self-learning AI, how our product and technology works is once deployed or where we are deployed, whether it be across the network, the email, the cloud, the SaaS environment, across the entire IT estate, what our self-learning AI is able to do is in a very short amount of time, learn what is intrinsically unique for you as a business. So if we take a mine, for example, because mining is actually our largest vertical that we work with across Africa, if we deploy at the core or the IT network of a mine, what our self-learning AI is able to do is understand what does every single device do within that particular organization. So what do your servers do on a daily basis? What are the users that make use of those different devices do on a daily basis? And what that AI then is able to do is build out what we call a pattern of life. So it understands every single business in its unique fashion, because unfortunately for us, you can't use a one-size-fits-all when it comes to cybersecurity. A bank, a government department, and a mine are completely different businesses. And that, for me, is really the secret sauce behind Darktrace, understanding what is intrinsically unique for each organization, and And through that, we're then able to detect when all of a sudden there's a shift in behavior. A device or an employee is acting out of character. You know, Prince at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday morning is all of a sudden pulling sensitive IP off the financial file server at Axis and looking to distribute that. You know, it's incredibly sophisticated in the fact that it can pick out those anomalies across any organization. So once again, I can see Ross is laughing because I always like to use this analogy. So disclosure, this is not my vehicle. Unfortunately not. I'm a dad of 2, so unfortunately that is not my car. But I always like to use this example because unfortunately for us in Johannesburg, hijacking is something that is incredibly prevalent within the region. So I like to use this analogy because it always hits home when talking to South African organizations. So if you take this vehicle's cockpit, you know, for example, if I had to sit within this vehicle, you know, being very slender, lean and well built, you know, my seat would be quite far forward, my mirrors would be in a very specific arrangement. If somebody then had to jump into this vehicle, so if we take that as an analogy of an infiltrator jumping into your network, so if we take Ross, for example, obviously slightly larger, not as well, you know, built and lean as I am, if he had to jump into my vehicle, the first thing that he would do is he would adjust the seating to fit his size and position, he would change the terrible music I listen to, he'd adjust the rearview mirror, the mirrors, etc. And we can use that analogy when it comes to somebody compromising a network, for instance, because fortunately for every single one of us in this room, any style of attack that we witness across an IT estate will cause a shift or deviation in behavior. Even the most sophisticated style of attacks, the slow and grow attacks that myself and Ross see, what infiltrators often like to do is they get within a network and they like to lay low for months, if not years, and then look to subtly look how they can compromise a business. Even in that example, there will be a shift in behavior and a deviation. Does that example make sense? I see a couple of people nodding. By the way, we're giving away this McLaren at the end of the event, so make sure you guys are focusing. Perfect. So before I end off, like I mentioned at the outset, what I always like to do is then draw it down to what are the key or the trending style of attacks that we're seeing both in Zimbabwe and Africa. Because it can sound really negative. It sounds doom and gloom. It sounds like we're all in a lot of trouble at the fact that cybercrime is on the rise, criminals are looking to target Africa, and you know we should all maybe look to change professions or jobs because it's going to get very difficult in the coming months. But what we're seeing at Darktrace across Africa is there's generally 3 styles of attacks that are the most prevalent across Zim, South Africa, and Africa at large. The first one is email techniques, and I'll go into this in a bit more detail. I sound like a broken record because I know we've discussed this at previous events, even with Axis Solutions, but email attacks are absolutely rife at the moment. They are probably 90+% of the type of attacks that we're seeing at Darktrace. Second to that, unknown vulnerabilities. So organizations not being aware of the different devices that exist on their network. You would be shocked when we run proof of values with organizations. One of the questions that Ross will first ask a business, say we're working with the mine, he'll say, fantastic team, how many IPs and devices do you have across the mine and across your IT estate? And they'll say, kind of scratch their head and say, you know, 2,000. When we deploy and we actually give visibility through the core switch, we generally see that it's double what is expected by a security team. And what myself and Ross always say is, if you don't know the number of devices that exist in your network, how are you possibly going to protect the business? So that's one of the key benefits that Darktrace can offer. And then lastly, and most frighteningly, because this is the hardest type of attack to defend against, is insider threat. So you've got somebody within your business that is actively looking to cause that business harm through an attack. So you've got a disgruntled employee, you've got a system admin that is looking to compromise a business. They have the keys to the castle, they have the credentials, they know what security is being used. You know, how in the world can you defend against that? And I'm going to go through that very quickly. So firstly, a lot of you might not be aware of this, but recent studies have shown that email is still the vehicle for in excess of 94% of all cyber attacks. You know, which for me is a frightening stat, because 94% of attacks begin in the email environment. So for us, you know, at Darktrace, when we're consulting and through the help of Axis Solutions as well, when we're having initial discussions with businesses, one of the first questions we ask them is, what are you guys doing to protect your email environment? A lot of those businesses will say, well, we've been using Microsoft 365 for a number of years, and we haven't had any issues. We then run a POV, and we see that those businesses are receiving in excess of 1,000 malicious emails on a daily basis. So email, like I mentioned, I'm not going to sound like a broken record here, but that is for us the first port of call when looking to secure a business. Take care of that, and you'll close a significant gap in terms of your cyber risk. So once again, KPMG African Cyber Report saw that the nature of attacks faced by African companies, we see that specifically 26% of those were business email compromised. So organizations receiving emails from known senders or phishing or spoofing emails into an organization, they then click on a link and, Bob's your uncle. That attacker has now unleashed a ransomware attack on your business. The stats, you can just go online and Google a lot of these for yourself, and like I said, the glaringly obvious issue that not only African but global businesses are facing is protecting their email environment. So I just want to go through a quick example, and this is probably the most common example that we see at Darktrace, and it generally comes or is focused on supply chain or individuals that have privilege within an organization. So this is what we call a known correspondent attack. So if we take Axis Solutions, for example, as a business, what an infiltrator will do is they will do a quick Google search, or they'll jump on LinkedIn. They'll see that Prince does business with Lenovo or with other organizations, perhaps within Zimbabwe, across Africa. It's very easy for a criminal to identify which organizations another organization would generally deal with. What they then do is they look to compromise that organization. So they will unleash an attack on that organization, and what they need is just one person's email credentials within that organization. They then jump into that email environment. They will then look at the send and receive history between Prince and this individual. They will then just craft a very strategically and sophisticated email, enticing Prince to click on a link. Maybe it's a PO that he's expecting or an order. So of course Prince is going to click on that link, faster than you can say Jack Russell. And the next thing you know, that organization has been infiltrated. We see this style of attack in Zim every single week. Ross and the team at Axis can show you key and live examples where we can show you reporting of these types of attacks that are being apprehended by organizations that we already work with in Zim. Any questions on that, guys? Because I see a lot of photos being taken, a lot of scratching of heads, a lot of skewed eyes. Does that all make sense? I didn't mention at the outset, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Perfect. The next... Yes. Question.
I see there's some very important information on your slides. And you are moving fast. Sometimes we want to capture the information. So I want to know if you can generate us enough to give us a slide after the...
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'll share that with Prince and the team. More than happy to share that with you guys. And if there's any additional information, stats, analysis that you need, myself and Ross are also happy to give that over. Perfect. So like I mentioned, team, the next trending style of attack that we see in Zim and in Africa, I just want to see if it'll click to the next slide. Oh, it's not working, it's all good. Is what we call unknown vulnerabilities. So like I alluded to earlier, when cybersecurity and security teams are unaware of devices and IPs that exist in their estate, one of the key, and if not one of the best advantages that Darktrace gives across a business is the fact that it provides a single pane where an IT or security professional can jump onto the UI of Darktrace and they can see within seconds what their entire IT estate looks like. So where do their devices sit? Where do their subnets sit? Which devices sit within those subnets? Which are their most vulnerable devices and IPs within their environments? And then more importantly, what are the users doing when they interact with these different devices? So once again, like I said, I always like to use examples. So there's a famous story, and I'm sure Prince and the team have heard this a few times. I see him smiling. But the fish tank example that we always like to talk about. So one of our largest clients in the US is arguably the largest casino chain. And they've been working with Darktrace for a number of years. One of the interesting attempted breaches that we saw within this casino chain is that the security team was unaware, like I mentioned, of the different IPs and devices that existed across their business. And what they didn't know, and this isn't their actual fish tank, I just had to find a picture, is that within their hotel lobby, there was an IoT device within their fish tank that was there to monitor the temperature, to monitor the clarity of the water. But what they were unaware of is, firstly, it existed and it was in this fish tank, and secondly, that obviously it was connecting and interacting with their corporate network. So we then saw and apprehended that from a Russian location, infiltrators were looking to leverage that IoT device or that thermometer in order to get into the corporate network, which is quite frightening. And we see examples of these on a weekly or daily basis. A smart device that might be within the boardroom in your corporate office is connecting with your corporate and IT network. CCTV cameras, the list goes on and on. All of these little IoTs and IPs provide a gap for infiltrators to get into your network and look to move laterally. And then lastly, guys, before we then go to a tea break, I want to chat through insider threat, because like I said, this is arguably the most scary or the most hard trending and type of attack to defend against, because these are individuals within your organization that are looking to to provide harm to an organization. A lot of the time what we see, and we've seen it in Zim, is that individuals generally in the IT space have either been let go by business and they're finalizing the last few days or on garden leave, and what they're looking to do is obviously cause harm to that business. So how can I cause the most amount of harm to the business? Try to pull as much sensitive IP and data from a bank, from a mine, from an insurer, and push that to my personal device. So a key stat here, as you can see, external attackers aren't the only threats. Malicious and negligent and compromised users are serious and growing risk. 2023, we saw a global report that insider threat incidents had risen by 44%. So this is a little bit of an older stat, but what we're seeing is that insider threat is growing. And I think specifically in Africa, like I mentioned, this would well and truly fall within the top 3 type of attacks that we're seeing. Perfect. So a quick example here, and I think Ross might touch on this if he's got a bit of time within the demo, is what Darktrace is able to do. Like I mentioned, it will know exactly what each and every single individual and device should be doing within your network. If we all of a sudden see a system admin who is on a Sunday morning at 11 a.m. logging onto his corporate device, jumping into a financial file server, from there looking to download a large amount of IP and data off that financial file server, and then look to push that data to his own personal device by using WeTransfer, a USB, whatever method he can get his hands on. Darktrace, as I mentioned, knowing that business, knowing that individual, would flag all of those as shifts and deviations in terms of his usability. So the fact that he's logging on at a peculiar time. Although he has access to the financial file server, he usually only logs on to that once every 3 months. Over and above that, in all his time at the business, he's never ever downloaded sensitive IP from that server to his device. All of these steps or deviations would be considered module breaches or red flags to our self-learning AI. And at that stage, Darktrace has the ability to then isolate, mitigate, and respond to each of those steps in order to ensure that the business is kept safe at all times. And this is just one example of the type of insider threat that we see. We are able to monitor the Microsoft suite. So, what is your organization and your teams doing on OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams? Are they sharing information they shouldn't be sharing? Are they moving information across to different areas of the business that they shouldn't be doing? Darktrace has eyes and ears everywhere, and it's able to keep an eye on essentially what every single user and device is doing at any stage 24/7 within your business. So like I mentioned, guys, just in closing, just to summarize, for us, if we as a business with the help of Axis Solutions are able to cover these main trending attack techniques or themes that we're seeing in Africa and Zim at the moment, then that's a good starting point in terms of ensuring that we can improve your posture from a security perspective. Of course, this isn't the silver bullet. If we can ensure that all of these loops are closed, your business is guaranteed to be protected. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But obviously, if we can look to close these that are the main apprehenders that we see most commonly, then obviously we're looking to move to a place where your business is more secure. So that's it from me. I see we're 5 minutes over time. Any final questions before we then head for a quick tea or coffee? Everyone's a little bit shy. Another question.
I heard you said you've got 12,000 clients around the world. Have you been a target yourselves by bad hackers, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's one that we get asked a lot. So, touch wood, I've always got to touch wood when I answer that. We ourselves, transparently, have never been compromised. But to your point, we, as well as a lot of the competitors and vendors that operate in the space, as you can imagine, are key points of attack. So we obviously use Darktrace across our entire business. Transparently, we also use Microsoft E5 licensing. And that essentially is the core of the protection that we ourselves at Darktrace use. But to your question, yes, well, fortunately, we haven't experienced any breach.
It's been one claimed attempt.
So they're also saying there's been one claimed attempt, but they didn't get through. So touch wood, long may that remain. Any other questions, guys? Yes.
Yeah, thanks Andrew for that presentation. I don't know whether you will answer that or maybe Ross later on during the presentation. Your self-learning AI, we've got this guy, he's already in our network, he's already pushing data out as part of their normal but malicious behavior. So you come in, it's the trend, it's normal, we don't know, like you mentioned, attackers will come in, sit, be doing a few things, so they are already in the system, we are taking you on as Darktrace and it's part of normal behavior. How do you help us think that it's an anomaly?
Thanks, Mike. So, very, very good question, and it's again another thing that comes up really often. So obviously with Darktrace is, the core of the solution is self-learning AI, right? Learning from each individual user device. Part of, Darktrace is a multi-layered AI, so we've got many different types of AI built into our suite. But part of the way that we analyze individual users and groups is through a method called clustering. So we'll see Mike sitting in the ICT department. He's got someone underneath him that is, we come into the environment. There's someone else sending sensitive information out of the business, but every single other user within the ICT department isn't doing that. And so what we use a sort of clustering and behavioral analysis perspective to understand each individual user, the team with which they fall, and the individual behavior of people within that specific team. So if we see someone who is behaving anomalously against the group in which they fall, that again, we see that as anomalous behavior. So we're not just using individual, we are using a group-wide sort of analysis and behavioral analysis between each individual user and the groups that they sit within. And Darktrace does that classification itself. So when we go into a department, we can see ICT department, we can see the levels of hierarchy within that department, and then we can measure each individual user against their sort of counterparts within that department. So we can pick up on an already compromised situation based on what we know about the team members and the web around them.
Then also just to add on to Ross's